So.
All right, one question then. I think we talked a lot about low carbon fuels and renewable in general. And Christian mentioned the competition between sectors. And I think it's a key element in the sense that this conference is about heating. And my questions to the different speaker, if I had to select only one, is how do we make sure that some of these low carbon and renewable fuels that we mentioned, e-fuels, HVO, also go to the heating sector? Because at the moment we see, at least in Europe, a lot of focus on transports. So may I ask our speakers if they could reply maybe in a short sentence about one element maybe that could come from government to make sure that some of these fuels of the future also go to the heating sector. Maybe Eric, you want to start with providing your view?
So you know, I think there's going to be a natural tension, right, between diesel, gasoline, and heating oil, right? And I do worry that heating oil is a relatively small component, right? And so I do think we'll be competing with those other sources of transport. But that being said, if we're involved with as the regulations are being made, right, we can carve out a position for us to get part of that, right? And whether it's attached, you know, and I'm sort of a little bit outside of my lines here, but if it's attached, by example, to diesel, that's fine, as long as we're part of the requirement and part of the value chain subsidy and we're equalized, it won't be a problem. If we're treated differently, then we really have to compete differently for that molecule. So, or another way to say it, there's a subsidy out there, right? And that subsidy essentially says you're going to get paid or you're not going to have to pay, okay, to use renewable diesel. But if you use something else, you're going to have to pay, right? And so if we're included in that regulatory sort of design, we'll be able to use that fuel as well. If we're left out, then we've got a different problem, right? And so that's on the renewable diesel, and I just picked that because that's sort of the new, you know, that's sort of the new hot product, right? But then you've got bio as well, right? And you've just got to make sure that we're treated equally as a transportation fuel as to heating fuel. If we're left out, then it's going to be, you know, because essentially they've created a mechanism. Nobody wants to talk about it as a tax. Ultimately, it is causing more expense, right, for the fuel, just for the fuel, right? And so we've just got to make sure that heating fuel is included 100%. And I don't know, John, if you feel differently, but, or if you've thought about it.
I think absolutely, Eric. If there's cross subsidization in the diesel market or gasoline market, and we're left out of that chain, we will have a very tough time getting any product in this market, period.
Right, and understand they're doing it slightly different, right? Because it's not a subsidy per se, but it's a carrot and stick, right? And the stick is, you know, if you're a producer or a refiner, you're creating these emissions, okay? But you have a requirement that you got to lower the emissions, and the only way you can lower those emissions is by buying those credits, right? That are only created, right, by renewable diesel in this example, right? And then within the renewable diesel, there are different requirements where there are different credits valued, right? If it's truly as renewable as possible, which means used cooking oil, by example, right? As opposed to oil that comes from crops, right? And that's not to say that that crops are bad, but they're less valued in this design scheme of sort of these, what I'd call credits almost.